One of the questions that arise from time to time is how much money a broker can hold from the landlord to pay for vendors and other bills. The creation of a reserve account to cover any routine bills, as well as unexpected problems, is completely negotiable between the owner and the property manager. When the manager sets up accounts with vendors, the manager should be certain to verify that the vendor will wait a few days for payment. Most plumbers and other contractors want payment before leaving the property. That is understandable, but in the case of property management, that is typically not possible. The contractor must present an invoice for their service, and the manager must go through whatever system the broker has for processing payments out of the trust account. Some might use a paper request, completed by the manager, with the invoice attached and submitted to the broker's office for payment. Knowing how many days that might be, the manager should be certain that the contractor understands the timeline. It could be 5 or more days from the time the work is done until the contractor receives a check. Since there is no regulatory or statutory limit on how much a manager could hold in reserve in the trust account, most managers think in terms of what is reasonable. If the owner has a home warranty on the property, then the typical repair could be limited to the copay, typically from $50 to $75. In the property management agreement, the parties should agree on how much that reserve should be, and the accounting needed to determine that the reserve has fallen below the agreed-upon level. Their agreement could mean that the landlord sends the broker a check to bring the reserve back to the agreed level, or they could agree that the broker would deduct the necessary amount from the next rent payment. That is fully negotiable between the parties. In addition, the owner could authorize the manager to spend any amount deemed necessary, or they could require approval over any dollar amount. Either way, the management agreement should clearly spell out these terms and conditions. For example, what would happen if the manager and the owner agree that the manager can spend up to $500, and any amount above that needs written approval? The broker is holding $2,740 of the owner's money in the trust account. It is Friday evening, and the tenant calls the manager to tell her that the heater is not working, and it is December, and there is a freeze warning. There is no home warranty on the property, and without heat, the manager would need to put the tenants up in a motel. Yes. The broker should include a sentence in any property management agreement that says the manager is authorized to exceed the agreed-upon limit if it considered an emergency or is being done to protect the tenants and/or the property. The AAR Property Management Agreement has that sentence. One common question is whether the owner or property manager is obligated to put the tenants up in a hotel-motel if something happens that renders the property uninhabitable. The answer is yes. They are obligated to pay for living expenses or allow the tenant to deduct that from the next rent payment. Of course, for a few days, the tenant should stay at Motel 6 or something like that, and not the Ritz-Carlton. You might think that the Ritz-Carlton would be appropriate if the tenant was paying $9,000 a month in rent in a 10,300 square foot house. However, such a house probably has 3 or 4 heaters, heat pumps, so the house would still be habitable if one furnace failed. It all comes down to what is reasonable. Both sections of the statutes below refer to the issue of something going wrong in the property, and the landlord not working diligently to remedy the problem. Such an issue might be heating in the middle of winter, a leak that requires turning off the main water pipe, or anything else that makes it extremely difficult or impossible for the tenant to live in the property. In the Arizona Residential Landlord and Tenant Act, that obligation is found under Landlord Obligations, ARS 33-1324A, Sections 2 and 4. In that section, it says that the landlord is obligated to maintain fit premises, and in Section 2, it says that the landlord shall make all repairs and do whatever is necessary to put and keep the premises in fit and habitable condition. Section 4 of ARS 33-1324, the landlord shall maintain in good and safe working order and condition all electrical, plumbing, sanitary, heating, ventilating, air conditioning, and other facilities and appliances, including elevators, supplied or required to be supplied by him. Ladies, this statute was written in the 1960s, and like other laws of the time, women were not considered to be landlords. Under the section labeled Tenant Obligations, found in 1364A3, it says that the tenant may procure reasonable substitute housing during the period of the landlord's non-compliance, in which case the tenant is excused from paying rent for the period of the landlord's non-compliance. In the event the periodic cost of such substitute housing exceeds the amount of the periodic rent, upon delivery by the tenant of proof of payment for such substitute housing, the tenant may recover from landlord such excess costs up to an amount not to exceed 25% of the periodic rent which has been excused pursuant to this paragraph. Yes, the tenant might be able to move to a motel for a few days and deduct that cost from their next rent check, but that should not be done without the approval and/or acknowledgement from the landlord or the property manager. The landlord's noncompliance means that the landlord or property manager is not responsive or not making any attempts to solve the problem. As such, the tenant is within his rights to move to a motel. In the above question, let's change some facts. The property manager answered the phone on the first call at 7:40 p.m. and had a technician there within the hour. The tech looked at the furnace and said that he will get a repair part from the warehouse first thing in the morning. Is the tenant within their rights to stay at a motel that night and deduct that cost from the rent? The answer is probably no, since the landlord has complied with the statute by responding promptly and arranging for a tech to look at the AC. The landlord cannot be held responsible if a part is not available at that moment in time. Property managers often face the difficult task of deciding if the house is habitable, and if not, finding and/or authorizing temporary replacement housing. In many parts of Arizona, a motel room is easy to find in July in Phoenix, but maybe not so easy in Flagstaff. Finding a motel room in the winter months, January through March, in the Phoenix metro area can be a challenge with all the winter visitors, spring training, golf tournaments, car shows, and other events. That could make it difficult if the house truly is not habitable. Each situation must be determined on a case-by-case basis. 1324. Landlord to maintain fit premises. A. The landlord shall 1. Comply with the requirements of applicable building codes materially affecting health and safety as prescribed in Section 9(1303). 2. Make all repairs and do whatever is necessary to put and keep the premises in a fit and habitable condition. 3. Keep all common areas of the premises in a clean and safe condition. 4. Maintain in good and safe working order and condition all electrical, plumbing, sanitary, heating, ventilating, air conditioning, and other facilities and appliances, including elevators, supplied or required to be supplied by him. 5. Provide and maintain appropriate receptacles and conveniences for the removal of ashes, garbage, rubbish, and other waste incidental to the occupancy of the dwelling unit and arrange for their removal. 6. Supply running water and reasonable amounts of hot water at all times, reasonable heat and reasonable air conditioning or cooling where such units are installed and offered, when required by seasonal weather conditions, except where the building that includes the dwelling unit is not required by law to be equipped for that purpose, or the dwelling unit is so constructed that heat, air conditioning, cooling, or hot water is generated by an installation within the exclusive control of the tenant and supplied by a direct public utility connection. B. If the duty imposed by subsection A, paragraph 1 of this section is greater than any duty imposed by any other paragraph of this section, the landlord's duty shall be determined by reference to that paragraph. C. The landlord and tenant of a single-family residence may agree in writing, supported by adequate consideration, that the tenant perform the landlord's duties specified in subsection A, paragraphs 5 and 6 of this section, and also specified repairs, maintenance tasks, alterations, and remodeling, but only if the transaction is entered into in good faith, not for the purpose of evading the obligations of the landlord, and the work is not necessary to cure non-compliance with subsection A, paragraphs 1 and 2 of this section. D. The landlord and tenant of any dwelling unit other than a single-family residence may agree that the tenant is to perform specified repairs, maintenance tasks, alterations, or remodeling only if 1. The agreement of the parties is entered into in good faith and not for the purpose of evading the obligations of the landlord, and is set forth in a separate writing signed by the parties and supported by adequate consideration. 2. The work is not necessary to cure non-compliance with subsection A, paragraphs 1 and 2 of this section. 3. The agreement does not diminish or affect the obligation of the landlord to other tenants in the premises.